Okay, today we come to the last chapter in the book of Ruth. So let's begin today by recapping the story of Ruth thus far. There was a couple living in Bethlehem named Elimelech and Naomi, and a famine struck. And so Elimelech moved his family to Moab in order to survive. And while there, Elimelech and Naomi's children married Moabite wives. However, tragedy struck when not only Elimelech, but both of Naomi's sons died, leaving Naomi and her two daughter-in-laws as widows. Naomi pleads with her daughters-in-law to return to Moab and find new husbands. Well, one returns to Moab, but the other, Ruth, commits to staying with Naomi no matter what happens. So Naomi returns to Bethlehem with Ruth, and Naomi is discouraged, insisting that the people in town call her by the name of Mara, which means bitter. Ruth goes out to glean in nearby fields to provide food for her and Naomi. And as it turns out, she's gleaned in a field belonging to Boaz, a close relative of Elimelech. And Naomi sees the opportunity for Boaz to serve as their kinsman redeemer. And she excitedly tells Ruth to get presentable and go lie at the feet of Boaz while he's sleeping at the threshing floor. When Ruth lies at Boaz's feet, Boaz wakes up startled. Ruth tells Boaz to cover her with his garment, which was an indication that she wanted him to be her redeemer and perhaps even her husband. And Boaz is delighted since he loves Ruth. He tells her, however, there is a closer relative in town. He has to check with him before he can commit to Ruth. And so, we pick up the story as Boaz sits at the town gate, waiting to meet with this relative. Ruth 4. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. In those days, cities typically had walls around them. And the primary reason for the walls was protection. Kind of reminds me of the story of the three little pigs. And as you recall in that story, the first two pigs made their houses as walls from sticks and straw. And they thought, good enough. But when the big bad wolf came, he was able to easily blow those houses down. The third pig made his house out of bricks. And as much as the wolf huffed and puffed, he could not blow down the walls of that house. So inside that house, the third pig felt pretty safe. And even when his greatest enemy attacked, the soundness, the stability of those walls protected him. In ancient times, walls were an important barrier to enemy attacks. So when enemies attacked a city, the people felt protected behind those walls, just as the third little pig did. Without the walls, the people in the city would be just sitting ducks. But of course, you have to go outside the walls sometimes, and that's what the gates were for. But more than just a big door, the area around the city gate was a place to meet people, a place to be seen, a place for civic affairs, a place to do business. It was kind of the town hall of its day. Excavations have found that there were often benches lining the area of the city gate where people could meet for their various purposes. So, if you were looking for a certain person, one of the best ways to find him would be just to hang out at the city gate for a while, and chances are he'd pass by there sooner or later. Those who worked in the fields had to pass by the city gate because the fields were outside the main gate. And so Boaz went to the city gate to wait for this kinsman redeemer to pass by. Verse 2. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here." And they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." "I will redeem it," he said. Boaz had a carefully planned strategy. And first, he explained to this kinsman redeemer that Naomi and Ruth had a field for sale that belonged to Naomi's late husband. And the kinsman redeemer had the first right of refusal on the land. He could agree to purchase it, or he could choose not to. And if he chose not to, Boaz would be next in line to purchase it. But there was more to it than just purchasing the land. Boaz asked the man about redeeming the land. And redeeming went beyond purchasing. A kinsman redeemer had a responsibility concerning the land of a relative. By buying the land, he would keep the land in the family. The kinsman redeemer kept and cared for the land until a destitute landowner could recover economically and buy it back. For this particular man, buying the land of Naomi seemed like a great business opportunity. After all, Naomi had no heir, so when Naomi died, the land would revert back to his family and his heirs. So the first step in Boaz's strategy was to get the man interested. Boaz couldn't serve as Ruth's kinsman redeemer unless the closer relative passed on it. But to pass on it, he first had to be made aware of the offer. Verse 5. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the guardian redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Once the kinsman redeemer was aware of the land for sale, which piqued his interest, then Boaz revealed more of the situation. The land deal, it was legit, but there was a catch. He said that when the kinsman redeemer redeems the land, he must also acquire Ruth, the Moabite. So to get the land, the guy would have to take on Ruth as well. So evidently, when Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, the property had passed on to Mahlon, Ruth's husband. And when Mahlon died, that left no male heir to inherit the property. But Ruth represents a potential heir. Children that she bore would be in line to inherit the land. When the kinsman redeemer heard about Ruth, he suddenly lost interest. The deal just turned sour. He basically said, "No deal. I can't afford to do that. It'll endanger my own estate." So, this man was not willing to pay to purchase and redeem the land because he'd have to marry Ruth and have babies, and those babies would take from him the land he purchased from Naomi. Not only that, but this kinsman redeemer would also be responsible for caring for Naomi, which would be more money out of his pocket. And who knows how many children Ruth might eventually have. It was all just too complicated, just too costly. So he tells Boaz that if he wants the land that's linked with Ruth, he can have it. Verse 7. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself," and he removed his sandal. Sometimes the rituals we use to seal the deal are kind of strange. In the case of Boaz and the kinsman redeemer, the deal was sealed by handing over a sandal of all things. So how did a sandal come to symbolize a land transaction? Well, perhaps it goes back to God's commandment to walk on the land and take possession. In Deuteronomy 11:24, God's preparing Israel to take the promised land. And God says, "Every place where you set your foot will be yours. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the Euphrates River to the Mediterranean Sea." So walking the land was a claim of possessing it. Therefore, the sandal symbolized possession of something. For the kinsman redeemer to take off his sandal and give it up symbolized that he was giving up possession of the land. The passing of the sandal was a physical act that could be witnessed by others. And so in years to come, the elders who witnessed this event could testify that the transaction had been completed because they saw this passing of the sandal to Boaz. Verse 9. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." So when the closer relative passed on redeeming the land and acquiring Ruth, Boaz, being next in line, was happy to take on that responsibility. So Boaz publicly declared that he would marry Ruth, as well as take on all of Naomi's needs, making sure she was cared for the rest of her life, as well as properly cared for in death. Boaz also took on the responsibility of caring for Ruth, but he was excited about this because he loved her. He would marry Ruth, giving her the opportunity to have children. And Ruth's first child would become the heir of Elimelech and his sons. And this meant that Boaz would buy the land, but in the end, he'd not keep any of the land. Verse 11. Then the elders of all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the women who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So the elders and witnesses rejoice at what they just witnessed, and they declare a blessing on Ruth and Boaz. In that blessing, they mention several people. First, they mention Rachel and Leah. And these were Jacob's two wives, who, along with their handmaids, produced 12 sons who became the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel. So what they meant by this was, may you be blessed with a lot of kids. And children were definitely considered a blessing from God. The more the merrier. Rachel was also significant because she had been barren for many years before she bore children. And so in a similar way, Ruth had been barren in Moab. The blessing also mentions Perez. And Perez was Judah's oldest son. And most of Judah descended from Perez. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, belonged to the tribe of Judah. And finally, the blessing mentioned Tamar. Tamar was Perez's mother, and she, like Ruth, was a foreigner. And also, like Ruth, her husband died before she was able to have children. She eventually had sons by Judah to have an heir and carry on the family name. The witnesses also blessed Boaz and Ruth to be highly regarded in Ephrathah and to be famous in Bethlehem. And Ephrathah was another name for Bethlehem, so both blessings referred to Bethlehem. And so the witnesses prayed for Boaz and Ruth to have standing in Bethlehem. And certainly their names were already in very good standing. The people knew them as people of godly character, and their good name never faded. And even today, thousands of years after the story of Boaz and Ruth occurred, we still remember their good name and their outstanding character. And they also prayed for Boaz and Ruth to be famous in Bethlehem. Well, that certainly did come to pass, didn't it? First, fame came to Bethlehem because David, Israel's greatest king, was a descendant of Boaz and Ruth and came from Bethlehem. But then more than that, a later descendant was none other than Jesus Christ, born by Mary and Joseph in the town of Bethlehem. Verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." In this union of Boaz and Ruth, the women in town saw God's faithfulness. They said that God had not left Naomi without a kinsman redeemer. And the kinsman redeemer they referred to in this case was not Boaz, but Obed, Ruth and Boaz's son. As Obed grows, he will care for Naomi in her old age. The women declared Ruth to be a daughter-in-law who was better to her than even 7 sons. In the Bible, 7 is a number that often symbolizes completeness and perfection. So 7 sons would be the ultimate blessing that could come to a Hebrew family. Ruth isn't Naomi's child by birth. She is a daughter-in-law. And yet this daughter-in-law from a foreign land is highly praised for her love and devotion to Naomi. Verse 16. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. So the baby's name was Obed. Obed certainly was a blessing to Naomi by caring for the family that brought him into the world, by continuing the family line, and by protecting the inheritance. But way more than that. Through his descendants, Obed would be blessing the entire world because through his line, the Messiah would come. Now, to some who read the book of Ruth, it's nothing but a nice rags to riches story. But the events recorded in Ruth laid the foundation for the births of David, Israel's greatest king, and Jesus, the promised Messiah. Of course, Ruth wasn't aware of the larger purpose in her life. She simply remained faithful to God through the good and bad of her life. Ruth couldn't look into a crystal ball and know her future, didn't know what God had planned for her. None of us can. We can't know our future. But we can trust God and we can live for Him because we know that He sees all of eternity, that nothing surprises Him. He has a plan and a purpose for our lives that even flow into generations that will come when our time on earth is over. Well, as we conclude the book of Ruth, let's think for a couple of minutes about the word redemption. Redemption is the key theme of chapter 4. And the words redeem, buy, and purchase are used at least 15 times. And Boaz is seen as a type of redeemer. And the manner in which he served as redeemer for Naomi and Ruth is a picture of how Christ redeems us. In the Bible, the word redeem carries the meaning of setting free by paying a price. So in the case of Ruth and Naomi, Boaz redeemed the land that belonged to Naomi's husband, Elimelech. Elimelech's land had either been sold or was under some kind of mortgage. When Elimelech died, the rights to the land had passed to Ruth's husband, Mahlon. However, Mahlon died too, which is why Ruth was involved in the transactions and she was Mahlon's widow. Ruth could have bought back the land belonging to Mahlon except for one thing. She simply couldn't afford to. She was a poor widow. She had no means to earn the amount of money to buy back the land. Redemption always involves a price that must be paid. Sometimes we think of our salvation as a free gift from God, and it is. Romans 6:23 says, "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord." Well, a gift is something that's freely given. A gift is something that can't be earned. If a friend gave me a new guitar for my birthday, I'd be excited. But what if he said, "I'm glad you like your gift. Now, in order to pay it off, I've arranged for you to paint my house next month"? Would I be nearly as excited about that gift? Of course not, because then it wouldn't be a gift at all if I have to earn it. Gifts are freely given with no strings attached, and that's how our salvation has been given to us. We can't earn it. It's a gift. However, a price has been paid for my salvation. Even the guy who gave me a guitar had to pay for the guitar. And although our salvation is free to us, Jesus paid the price in order to give it to us. And it's a very costly thing, even though it's freely given to us. When it comes to spiritual redemption, All people are in bondage to sin and Satan. In John 8:34, Jesus says, "Verily, truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin." Romans 3:23 makes it clear that all have sinned. So everyone has sinned. Everyone's a slave to sin. And as slaves, we are unable to set ourselves free. But Jesus gave his life to pay the price for our freedom from sin. Now, there are some parallels regarding a kinsman redeemer, such as Boaz, and Jesus Christ, our Redeemer. Not just anybody could perform the duties of a kinsman redeemer. First, the kinsman redeemer had to be a near kinsman. We recall that Naomi became very excited when she learned that Ruth was working in Boaz's field, because she recognized Boaz as a near kinsman. And as a close relative, he was able to serve as their redeemer. When I think of the Christmas story, I think of baby Jesus lying in a manger, surrounded by his adoring parents and by shepherds and various barnyard-type animals. But we so romanticize the Christmas story that we miss the point. The main focus of Christmas isn't that Jesus is a baby. It's that Jesus is human. It's that God came in flesh and blood into our world. It's that God identifies with us. Because if Jesus is to be our Redeemer, he's got to identify with us. He must be related to us before he can redeem us. And so he came in human flesh in order to become our Redeemer. Hebrews 2:14 and 15 says, "Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death." So when Jesus was born into this world in human flesh, he became our near kinsman and will remain our kinsman for all eternity. Second, the kinsman redeemer had to be able to pay the redemption price. Well, Ruth and Naomi were way too poor to redeem the land, but Boaz had all the resources to make it happen. And when it comes to us being slaves to sin, we are powerless to redeem ourselves. We can't pay the price for our freedom. Well, some try. Some try to pay the price for their freedom, and they try by attempting to live a good life. And there are a lot of good people in the world, but a good life isn't good enough. To pay our freedom from sin, only a perfect life will do, and we all fall far short of that. And some try to pay their own freedom by service to others. They just think that if they're really helpful to other people, then they'll earn a place in heaven. But that's not salvation. That's karma. And karma is a belief that what we do in this present life will be the determining factor in our future lives. Some try to pay their way by actually giving money. As crazy as it sounds, there are some who, out of their wealth, will donate large sums of money to churches or charities or religious institutions, thinking that somehow they're building up credit with God that'll result in they'll being able to be included in heaven. Well, all these fall short. Only Jesus has the resources to pay the price to redeem us. Acts 4:12 says, "Salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved." And then the kinsman redeemer had to be willing to redeem. In the story of Ruth, one of the kinsman redeemers had the ability to redeem Naomi and Ruth, but he didn't want to. He declined. He could not be forced to offer redemption. It had to be something he wanted to do. He was willing to do. But Boaz not only had the resources to redeem Ruth and Naomi, he had the desire. He wanted to serve as their redeemer. And as difficult as it was, Jesus willingly died for our sins, paying the price for our redemption. 1 John 3:16 says, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us." When Boaz redeemed the land, he had nothing to profit. The redeemed land would belong to Ruth's son. He redeemed the land because he loved Ruth. He redeemed because of love. And when Jesus died on the cross, he had nothing to profit. He laid down his life because he loved us, even in our sin. He redeemed because of love. Christ is our Redeemer. He's paid the price for our freedom. But this gift must be accepted. And the sad reality is that most people remain slaves to sin rather than accept the freedom that Christ offers. But Jesus paid the price for our freedom. He paid the price through his death to give us life. And just as Naomi and Ruth were filled with joy, the kindness, the love of Boaz, we also find our joy in the love and kindness of our Redeemer, Jesus Christ.